The sun blazed mercilessly over Bitter Creek, Arizona territory, on that August morning in 1887. The air shimmered with heat waves rising from the dusty Main Street, where townsfolk gathered around a makeshift wooden platform that usually served for livestock auctions. But today, there were no horses or cattle being sold. Clara May stood on that platform, her hands clasped in front of her worn calico dress, trying to make herself smaller despite her considerable height. At 24 years old, she towered over most women in town and stood eye to eye with many of the men. Her sun-weathered skin bore the marks of years working under the harsh desert sun, and her auburn hair, hastily tied back with a frayed ribbon, caught glints of copper in the morning light. "Step forward, girl," barked Silas Hartley, the man who had taken her in as a child after her parents died of fever. He wasn't her blood, but for 14 years, she'd called him family. Now he prodded her forward like she was nothing more than an unwanted mule. The crowd murmured, some with pity, others with barely concealed amusement. Clara recognized every face Mrs. Abernathy from the general store, who always tisked when Clara reached the high shelves without a ladder. Tom Bradley, the blacksmith's son, who once told her she was built like a plow horse, and dozens of others who had watched her grow from a gangly orphan into what they considered an unmarriageable oddity. "Now, folks," Silas announced, mopping his brow with a dirty handkerchief. "We all know times are hard. The Hartley farm can't support extra mouths no more, especially ones that—" He glanced at Clara with a mixture of embarrassment and irritation. "Ain't likely to find their own way through marriage." Clara's jaw tightened, but she kept her eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the crowd. She'd heard these words whispered for years. Too tall, too strong, too much. No man wanted a wife who could outwork him in the fields or stand taller than him at Sunday service. "She's a good worker," Silas continued, his voice taking on the practiced cadence of a merchant. "Strong as any man, can lift a full sack of grain easy as breathing. Knows her way around cooking, mending, tending animals. Just needs a different situation." The silence that followed was broken only by the creak of wagon wheels as someone passed by on the street. Clara felt the weight of every stare, every whispered comment that drifted to her ears. "How much you asking, Hartley?" called out Josiah Mills, who ran the largest ranch outside town. "Well now," Silas rubbed his stubbled chin, "I figure a sack of cornmeal and 2 barrels of kerosene would be fair trade. Woman like her could work your fields, help your wife with the heavy chores." "My wife don't need help from no giant," Mills shot back, earning scattered chuckles from the crowd. Clara's fingernails dug into her palms, but she remained statue still. Inside, something began to burn, not quite anger, not quite shame, but a slow-building fire that had been kindling for years. "Perhaps the Wright family," someone suggested. "They got all those children to tend." Mrs. Wright, a pinched-faced woman in a starched bonnet, shook her head vigorously. "Lord knows we barely feed the mouths we have. Besides, wouldn't be proper, having a grown woman like that around my boys." The implications hung in the air like dust motes. Clara was too big, too different, too much of everything that didn't fit into their neat little boxes of what a woman should be. "Come now, folks." Silas's voice took on a wheedling tone. "Surely someone needs an extra pair of hands. She don't eat much for her size, and she's never been no trouble." "That's 'cause no man's ever tried to court her," someone called out, triggering more laughter. The auctioneer Silas had hired, a greasy man named Cornelius Pratt, stepped forward. He walked around Clara like she was horseflesh, making a show of examining her. "Turn around, girl. Let them see you proper," he commanded. Clara turned slowly, mechanically, her face a mask of composure even as her insides churned. She caught sight of young Sally Morrison in the crowd, a girl she'd helped teach letters to just last summer. Sally looked away quickly, as if Clara's situation might be contagious. "Strong arms," Pratt announced. "Good teeth, no signs of illness. Bit old for starting a family, but plenty of work years left in her." "She ain't no slave," muttered someone in the crowd. Old Samuel Hayes, the preacher. "This ain't right, even for hard times." "Ain't nobody forcing nothing," Silas said defensively. "Just trying to find a better arrangement for all concerned." The girl agrees. "Don't you, Clara?" All eyes turned to her. Clara finally looked directly at Silas, the man who had given her a roof but never a home, food but never kindness, a place to exist but never to belong. "I agree," she said, her voice steady and clear, "that I've been a burden long enough." The words seemed to satisfy Silas, who missed the steel underneath them. As the sun climbed higher and the crowd grew restless, it became clear that no one would make an offer. People began to drift away, heading back to their shops and daily business. Some of the women clutched their shawls tighter despite the heat, as if Clara's fate was a specter that might haunt them too. "Well," Pratt said with false joviality, "seems the market's not favorable today. What do you want to do with her?" "Hardly." Clara stood forgotten on the platform as the men discussed her fate like she wasn't there. The platform boards were rough under her feet, and a splinter dug into her heel through her worn boot. She focused on that small pain, letting it anchor her to the moment, keeping the threatening tears at bay. "Could send her to Phoenix," someone suggested. "Bigger city might have need for household help." "Or the mining camps," another added. "They always need cooks and laundresses." Clara knew what kind of life awaited women in the mining camps. She'd rather take her chances in the desert with the rattlesnakes and scorpions. The crowd had thinned to just a handful of curious onlookers and those with nothing better to do when the stranger appeared. He moved through the remaining people like smoke, barely disturbing the air around him. Clara noticed him first as a shadow at the edge of her vision, then as a tall figure in a dust-colored duster and worn hat pulled low against the sun. He stood at the back, still as a fence post, watching, unlike the others. His gaze held no mockery, no pity, no calculating measurement. He simply observed, as if seeing something everyone else had missed. "Going once," Pratt called out half-heartedly, though no bid had been made. "Going twice." The stranger moved then, his spurs making soft music as he walked. The crowd parted, perhaps recognizing something in his bearing that commanded space. He stopped at the foot of the platform, looking up at Clara, and for the first time that morning, she found herself having to look up to meet someone's eyes. "That won't be necessary," he said quietly, his voice carrying despite its low volume. Silas squinted at him. "You looking to make an offer, Mr.?" The stranger didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped onto the platform with an easy grace that belied his size. Up close, Clara could see his face beneath the hat's brim, weathered but not old, with lines that spoke of sun and wind rather than years. His eyes were the color of sage honey, and they held depths she couldn't read. Without warning, he bent and lifted her from the platform as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. Clara gasped, her hands instinctively gripping his shoulders for balance. No one had carried her since she was a very small child, and the sensation of being held, of being lifted without strain or struggle, sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "You're just right for my arms," he said, loud enough for all to hear, though his eyes never left hers. The crowd fell silent. Even Pratt's jaw hung open. The stranger set Clara gently on the ground beside the platform, keeping one hand at her elbow as if to steady her, though she wasn't the one who seemed unsteady. "Now, see here," Silas blustered. "You can't just—" The stranger reached into his coat and pulled out a silver dollar. He flipped it to Silas, who caught it reflexively. "For your trouble," the stranger said, "though I'm not buying anything, just making a wager on something others were fool enough to overlook." He turned to Clara. "Name's Elijah Boone. I've got a spread up on the Colorado line. Could use someone who knows their own worth, even when others don't see it. You interested?" Clara looked at this man who had lifted her, truly lifted her without grunt or strain, who had said she was just right when everyone else had spent years telling her she was all wrong. She glanced back at Silas, red-faced and speechless, clutching his silver dollar, at the townspeople, watching with a mixture of shock and something that might have been envy. "I'm interested. Mr. Boone," she said. He nodded once, satisfied. "Got a wagon at the livery? We can collect your things and be on the trail before noon." "Won't take long," Clara said. "I don't have much." "Then we'll get you what you need," he said simply, as they walked away from the platform, leaving behind the murmurs and stares. Clara felt the sun on her face differently than she had an hour ago. It still blazed just as hot, but somehow it didn't weigh quite as heavy. Behind them, Silas found his voice. "You can't just take her. There's papers to sign, arrangements to make." Elijah paused, turning back slightly. "Then write them up and send them along. You know where the Boone Ranch is." His tone suggested that everyone did, or should. As they reached the edge of the square, Clara asked quietly, "Why?" He glanced down at her, one of the few men who could. "Why what? Why did you intervene? You don't know me. I could be everything they think too much trouble, too difficult to manage." Elijah was quiet for a long moment as they walked. Then he said, "My mother was tall, taller than my father by half a head. He used to say God made her that height so she could reach the stars when she prayed and look angels in the eye when she sang." He paused. "Seemed to me those fools back there were trying to sell off something precious just because it didn't fit in their small boxes. I don't much care for waste." Clara felt that burning sensation in her chest again. But this time it wasn't anger or shame. It was something altogether different, something that felt dangerously close to hope. The wagon wheels creaked rhythmically as they rolled away from Bitter Creek, leaving behind a dust cloud and more than a few wagging tongues. Clara sat beside Elijah on the driver's bench, her few possessions a carpetbag with 2 dresses, her mother's Bible, and a small wooden box of personal items resting at her feet. The space between them was careful, respectful, but not uncomfortable. For the first hour, neither spoke. Clara had grown accustomed to silence in the Hartley household, where her presence was tolerated rather than welcomed. But this silence felt different. It wasn't heavy with disapproval or thick with unspoken resentments. It simply was, like the desert stretching endlessly before them. The landscape changed gradually as they traveled north. The flat, dusty plains gave way to rolling hills dotted with sage and scattered juniper. Red rock formations rose in the distance like ancient sentinels, and the sky seemed to grow larger with each mile they put between themselves and town. "You hungry?" Elijah asked eventually, his voice breaking the quiet without shattering it. "No, sir," Clara replied automatically, though her stomach had been empty since dawn. He glanced at her, a slight frown creasing his brow. "When's the last time you ate?" "Yesterday's supper." Without comment, he reached behind the seat and pulled out a cloth bundle. Inside were biscuits, dried beef, and 2 apples that had seen better days but were still edible. He handed her half without ceremony. "We've got a long way to go," he said. "No sense arriving weak with hunger." Clara took the food, surprised by the simple kindness of the gesture. At the Hartley farm, meals were parceled out according to work done and mouth priority. She always ate last and least, despite doing more than her share of labor. "Thank you," she said, biting into a biscuit that tasted better than any feast she could remember. They ate in companionable silence, passing a canteen of water between them. The sun climbed higher, and Elijah adjusted his hat to shade his eyes. Clara noticed his hands on the reins, scarred and calloused from work, but gentle in their movements. "You raised out here?" she asked, curiosity overcoming her usual reticence. "Colorado, mostly," he replied. "Moved down to the territory about 6 years back. Land was available, and I had my reasons for wanting a fresh start." There was something in the way he said reasons that discouraged further inquiry, so Clara didn't press. Everyone in the West had stories they'd rather leave buried. "And you?" he asked. "Always been in Bitter Creek?" "Since I was 10. My folks died of fever on the trail out from Missouri. The Hartleys took me in." She paused, gave me a roof and work. I'm grateful for that. Elijah made a sound that might have been disagreement, but didn't elaborate. Instead, he pointed to a hawk circling overhead. Redtail, probably hunting ground squirrels. They're good luck, some say. Clara watched the bird's lazy circles against the endless blue. "Do you believe in luck, Mr. Boone?" "Call me Elijah," he said. "And I believe in making your own luck, mostly, but sometimes," he glanced at her briefly, "sometimes something drops into your path that you'd be a fool to ignore." The implied compliment made Clara's cheeks warm, and she busied herself with folding the empty cloth bundle. As the afternoon wore on, the trail began to climb. The horses, a matched pair of bays, pulled steadily upward, and the air grew marginally cooler. Pine trees appeared, first as scattered specimens, then in small groves. "There," Elijah said finally, pointing to a valley ahead. "That's home." Clara looked where he indicated and felt her breath catch. Nestled against a hillside, surrounded by pines with a creek glinting silver at its base, sat a cabin. It wasn't large or fancy, but it was solid, well-built, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. A barn stood nearby, along with a corral where a few horses grazed. Beyond that, she could see the beginnings of planted fields. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. "It's peaceful," he replied. "That's what I was after." As they descended into the valley, Clara noticed the careful placement of everything the cabin positioned to catch morning sun, but shaded in the afternoon. The barn situated to shelter animals from winter winds. The fields laid out to best use the water from the creek. This was the work of someone who thought ahead, who planned and built with purpose. The horses knew they were home and picked up their pace. As they pulled into the yard, a dog emerged from the barn, a blue heeler with intelligent eyes who barked once, then wagged his tail when he recognized Elijah. "That's Moses," Elijah said, climbing down from the wagon. "He's particular about strangers, but he'll warm up to you quick enough." He came around to Clara's side and offered his hand to help her down. She hesitated. She'd been getting in and out of wagons on her own since childhood, but something in his patient waiting made her accept. His hand was warm and steady, and he didn't struggle with her weight as she stepped down. Moses approached cautiously, sniffing at Clara's skirts. She held out her hand, letting him investigate, and was rewarded with a tentative tail wag. "See, you've passed the first test," Elijah said with what might have been a smile. He grabbed her carpet bag before she could reach for it. "Come on, I'll show you the house." The cabin's interior was as thoughtfully arranged as its exterior. The main room served as kitchen, dining, and living space, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. The furniture was handmade, but skillfully crafted a table with 4 chairs, a rocking chair by the fire, shelves lined with books and supplies. Everything was clean, but lived in. Speaking of a bachelor's careful housekeeping, "Bedrooms through there." Elijah indicated a door. "There's a loft above that I've been using for storage, but it could be made comfortable. Tomorrow we'll head to town for a proper bed and whatever else you need." Clara blinked. "The loft? But where will you—" "I'll take the loft," he said firmly. "You'll have the bedroom. It's only proper." "Mr. Boone Elijah, I can't put you out of your own bed. I'm here to work, not to—" "You're here because those fools in town couldn't see value when it was standing right in front of them," he interrupted gently. "And because I've got need of help running this place, but you're not a servant. Clara, you're—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "You're a partner in making this ranch work. Partners don't sleep in lofts if there's better available." The word partner hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than its simple syllables suggested. "I don't understand," Clara said quietly. "You don't know me. I could be lazy or dishonest or any number of things. Why would you trust a stranger like this?" Elijah walked to a shelf and pulled down a framed photograph, handling it with obvious care. He studied it for a moment before turning it toward her. The image showed a young woman with dark hair and laughing eyes, beautiful in the way that comes from joy rather than mere features. "Her name was Margaret," he said. "We were to be married 3 years ago. She died in a fire. An accident, they said, though." He trailed off, then shook his head. "The point is, I learned something about judging people in those days after. How folks you thought were friends could disappear when scandal touched you. How strangers could show kindness when your own turn away." He set the photograph back carefully. "Today in town, I saw them trying to break something just because it didn't fit their narrow ideas. Maybe I couldn't stop what happened to Margaret, but I could stop that. Maybe that makes me a fool. Time will tell." Clara felt tears prick her eyes, the first she'd allowed herself in years. "I'm sorry about your loss," she said. "Thank you." He cleared his throat. "Now, you must be tired. Why don't you rest a bit while I see to the horses' suppers at sundown? Nothing fancy, but filling." He headed for the door, then paused. "Clara, that silver dollar I gave Hartley, that wasn't payment for you. You can't buy a person's worth. That was just settling old debts. He owed me for some work I did years back. Figured it was time to collect." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her standing in the middle of the cabin that was somehow, impossibly, to be her home. Clara moved to the bedroom doorway and looked in. The bed was simply made with a quilt that showed careful mending. A washstand stood in the corner, a small mirror above it. She caught sight of herself tall, broad-shouldered, still wearing the dress she'd stood in at the auction. But something was different. The woman in the mirror stood straighter. Her eyes looked less hollow. For the first time in memory, Clara May didn't wish to be smaller. Outside, she could hear Elijah talking to the horses in low, soothing tones. Moses barked once, then settled. The late afternoon sun slanted through clean windows, painting golden squares on the wooden floor. Clara unpacked her few belongings, placing her mother's Bible on the bedside table, her dresses in the wardrobe that stood against the wall, the wooden box she left wrapped in cloth at the bottom of her bag. Some memories weren't ready to be unpacked yet. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Clara made her way back to the main room. Through the window, she could see Elijah at the corral, checking the horses' hooves with practiced efficiency. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of a man comfortable in his own skin, at peace with his place in the world. For the first time since her parents died, Clara allowed herself to think the word home, not just shelter, not just a place to work for her keep, but perhaps possibly home. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. The first week at the Boone Ranch passed in a rhythm of adjustment and discovery. Clara woke each morning to the sound of roosters crowing and the soft nickering of horses, rather than Silas Hartley's harsh commands. She dressed in the pre-dawn darkness, still uncomfortable in the bedroom that felt too fine for someone like her, and made her way to the kitchen where Elijah was invariably already brewing coffee. They had developed an unspoken routine. She would take over the coffee preparation while he headed out for the morning chores. By the time he returned, she had breakfast-ready biscuits and gravy, flapjacks, or cornmeal mush with bacon. They ate together at the handmade table, discussing the day's tasks like the partners he had claimed they would be. It was during one of these quiet mornings that Clara first noticed the inconsistency in the cabin's construction. While washing dishes, she observed how the doorframe to the bedroom had been modified. Saw marks indicated it had been widened and heightened from its original dimensions. The realization struck her. Elijah had altered his home for Margaret, the dark-haired woman in the photograph who must have been tall like Clara. She found herself studying that photograph when Elijah was out working. Margaret's face held a vitality that seemed to leap from the silver-toned image. This was a woman who had been loved, who had been worth changing door frames for. Clara wondered if she would ever inspire such devotion, then chided herself for the foolish thought. One evening, while mending a torn shirt by lamplight, Clara worked up the courage to ask about Margaret. Elijah was oiling a harness, his hands methodical in their movements. "How did you meet her?" His hands stilled for just a moment before resuming their work. "Church social in Denver. She was new in town, come to teach school. Tallest woman there except for my mother." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "She was trying to hang decorations and having a time of it with the local men falling over themselves to help, each one shorter than the last. I walked over and said, 'Looks like you could use someone who can reach.' She looked me up and down and said, 'Looks like you'll do.'" Clara smiled despite the ache in her chest. "She sounds wonderful." She was. Elijah set down the harness. Smart as a whip, funny, kind, didn't care one bit what people thought about her height or her opinions. She had plenty of both. "What happened?" Clara asked softly. "If it's not too painful to speak of." Elijah rose and walked to the window, gazing out into the darkness. There was a man, Gideon Rusk, owns the biggest spread in 3 counties. He decided he wanted Margaret. Couldn't accept she'd chosen a small rancher over him. Started making trouble fences cut, water diverted, stock going missing. Nothing we could prove. He paused, his jaw tightening. "One night, I was in town getting supplies. The house caught fire. Margaret," his voice roughened. "They said a lamp must have fallen, but Margaret was careful about such things, and Rusk's foreman was seen riding away from our place that night, though he swore he was nowhere near." "You think Rusk—" "I know he did something," Elijah said flatly. "Whether he meant for it to go that far or just wanted to scare her, doesn't matter now. She's gone. And he's still the biggest man in the county. The law couldn't touch him without proof." Clara set down her mending. "Is that why you moved here?" "Partly. Couldn't stay where every corner held a memory. Couldn't look at Rusk's men without wanting—" He shook his head. "This place was far enough away to start over, but close enough to keep an eye on things. Make sure he doesn't forget I'm still around." The oil lamp flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Moses, who had taken to sleeping by Clara's feet, raised his head and whined softly. "I'm sorry," Clara said. "Sorry for your loss, and sorry for bringing up painful memories." Elijah turned from the window. "Don't be. It's good to speak of her sometimes. Keeps her memory alive." He studied Clara in the lamplight. "She would have liked you. I think you've got the same way of just getting on with things. No fuss or complaint." That night, Clara lay in the bed that had been meant for another woman and stared at the ceiling. She thought about love that changed door frames and grief that changed addresses. She thought about Gideon Rusk, whose name tasted bitter even in thought. Most of all, she thought about Elijah's quiet strength and wondered if she could ever be worthy of the trust he'd placed in her. The next morning brought a trip to town for supplies. Not Bitter Creek. Elijah had no intention of subjecting Clara to that gossip mill, but Pine Ridge, a smaller settlement about 2 hours north. The general store there was well stocked, and the proprietor, an elderly man named Josiah Weatherby, greeted Elijah warmly. "Elijah Boone, been too long. Son, and who's this?" "This is Clara May," Elijah said simply. "She's helping me run the ranch. We need to outfit her proper." If Weatherby found anything unusual about the arrangement, his face didn't show it. "Welcome. Miss, what can we help you with today?" Clara, who had expected to purchase perhaps one sturdy work dress and basic necessities, found Elijah had other ideas. He insisted on 3 dresses, 2 for work and 1 for town occasions, proper boots, a warm coat for winter, and various smaller items she tried to protest were unnecessary. "Partners need proper equipment," he said firmly, adding a broad-brimmed hat to the pile. "Son's fierce up at the ranch." While Weatherby's wife helped Clara with the clothing selections, Elijah conducted his own business. Clara emerged from the back room to find him examining a narrow iron bedstead. "For the loft," he explained. "That old cot up there's seen better days." "But—" "No arguments. Winter's coming, and sleeping cold makes for poor work. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "Moses has taken to sleeping in your room. Only fair I get something comfortable too." The ride back was different from their first journey together. Clara wore one of her new dresses, still practical but properly fitted, and her new hat shaded her face. The wagon bed held not just supplies, but the beginnings of a real life. "Thank you," she said as they neared the ranch. "For everything." "I'll work hard to earn it all back." Elijah gave her a sharp look. "You'll work because there's work to be done, not to pay debts that don't exist. We clear on that. But the expense—" "Clara." He stopped the wagon and turned to face her fully. "I'm not a rich man, but I'm not poor either. This ranch does well enough. What good is money if it sits in a bank while people go without what they need? You needed things. I could provide them. End of story." Clara felt that dangerous warmth in her chest again. "I'm not accustomed to kindness without strings," she admitted. "Then get accustomed to it," he said gruffly, starting the horses again. "Though, if it makes you feel better, you can consider it selfish on my part. Ranch runs better with two people, and a person works better when they're properly equipped and comfortable." That evening, after they'd unloaded the supplies and Elijah had assembled the new bed in the loft with minimal cursing, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. Moses lay between them, occasionally thumping his tail when one or the other moved. "I found something today," Clara said, reaching into her pocket. She pulled out a folded piece of paper. It fell out of one of the old ledgers in the barn. She handed it to Elijah, who unfolded it carefully. His face went very still as he recognized what it was: a sketch of the original house, with additions penciled in. "Build summer kitchen here," one note read. "Margaret's sewing room," read another. "She was part of your plans," Clara said gently. "This whole place was built with her in mind." "It was," Elijah admitted, his voice rough. "Every board, every nail. Seems foolish now." "Not foolish, hopeful. That's never foolish." Clara hesitated, then added, "This place, it's too good for just one person. It was meant to be shared." Elijah folded the paper and handed it back. "Keep it," he said. "Put it somewhere safe. Plans can change, but it's good to remember what started them." As full dark settled over the valley, they moved inside. Clara prepared a simple supper while Elijah tended to evening chores. When they sat down to eat, the silence was comfortable, broken only by the pop of pine logs in the fireplace and Moses's hopeful whines for scraps. "Winter's coming," Elijah said eventually. "We'll need to prepare. Wood to cut, supplies to lay in, repairs to make. It's hard work." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Clara replied. "I know." He met her eyes across the table. "That's why I knew you belonged here the minute I saw you on that platform. You've got the look of someone who faces what comes without flinching." Clara thought of all the times she had flinched, all the small cruelties that had worn her down like water on stone. But perhaps that was the point: she had worn down but not worn away. She was still here, still standing. "We'll face winter together then," she said, and was rewarded with one of Elijah's rare full smiles. Later, as Clara prepared for bed in the room that still felt too fine, she carefully placed the sketch in her wooden box alongside her other precious things. Plans could indeed change, she thought. Sometimes they changed into something even better than originally imagined. Through the floor, she could hear Elijah settling into his new bed in the loft, the boards creaking under his weight. Moses padded into her room and curled up on the rag rug beside the bed. The night sounds of the ranch owl calls, horse snorts, wind in the pines created a lullaby of belonging. For the first time in her adult life, Clara May fell asleep without wishing she was someone else, somewhere else. She was exactly where she needed to be. The changes came gradually, like snow accumulating on pine branches unnoticed until the weight became visible. Elijah first realized he was adapting his home for Clara the morning he found himself sawing 2 inches off the legs of the kitchen table. She had been kneading bread, her height forcing her to hunch uncomfortably. Though she hadn't complained. "What are you doing?" Clara asked, emerging from the root cellar with preserves for breakfast. "Making improvements," he replied, not looking up from his work. "Table's too high, poor construction on my part." She set down the jars with a soft clink. "The table was fine." "Was fine for me. Need to be fine for both of us now." He tested the newly shortened leg, nodding with satisfaction. "Should have done this sooner." Clara watched him work, something unreadable in her expression. "You altered things for Margaret, too," she said quietly. "The door frames, the shelves in the bedroom, they're all modified." Elijah's hand stilled on the saw. "That I did." "I don't need you to change your whole house for me. Elijah, I've spent my life learning to fit into spaces not made for me." He set down his tools and straightened, meeting her eyes. "Maybe that's exactly why it needs changing. Persons shouldn't have to make themselves smaller to fit their life. Life should expand to fit the person." The words hung between them, carrying more weight than a simple discussion of furniture. Clara turned away first, busying herself with breakfast preparations. But Elijah caught the sheen in her eyes before she did. Over the following weeks, the modifications continued. A new workbench in the barn, built to Clara's height. Pegs for hanging tools relocated where she could reach them easily. Even the clothesline was raised, a simple thing that made Elijah wonder how many years she'd spent straining to perform basic tasks. Clara responded to each change with initial protest, followed by quiet acceptance. And finally, most rewarding to Elijah, unconscious ease. He found himself watching for the moments when she moved without thinking, reaching for something exactly where it should be, standing straight instead of hunched. These small victories felt larger than any successful harvest. The work itself became a form of communication between them. Clara proved herself capable of any task, from mending fences to gentling spooked horses. She had a way with the animals that impressed even Moses, who had appointed himself her devoted shadow. The dog now barely tolerated Elijah's presence in what he clearly considered Clara's kitchen. One afternoon, while replacing shingles on the barn roof, Clara paused in her hammering to survey the valley. The autumn light painted everything gold, and a hawk circled lazily overhead. "Beautiful country," she said. Elijah, working beside her, nodded. "It is peaceful, too, usually." Something in his tone made her look at him. "Usually." He gestured toward the eastern boundary. "Rusk's land starts about 2 miles that way. He's been quiet since I moved here, but men like him don't forget. He'll test boundaries eventually." "Are you worried?" "Cautious," Elijah corrected. "There's a difference. Worried men make mistakes. Cautious men make preparations." Clara absorbed this, then returned to her shingling. After a moment, she said, "Teach me to shoot." Elijah nearly dropped his hammer. "What?" "If trouble comes, I should know how to defend the ranch." "Defend myself." She kept her eyes on her work. "I'm tired of being helpless when men decide my fate." That evening, Elijah set up targets behind the barn. He started with his old Henry rifle, showing Clara how to hold it, sight it, squeeze rather than pull the trigger. She was an attentive student, following instructions precisely, adjusting her stance as directed. Her first shots went wide, but she didn't flinch from the recoil despite its punch against her shoulder. By the 10th shot, she was hitting the target. By the 20th, she was grouping them respectably. "You're a natural," Elijah said, genuinely impressed. "I have good motivation," Clara replied, lowering the rifle, "and a good teacher." As they walked back to the house in the gathering dusk, Moses trotting between them, Clara said, "Tell me more about Rusk. What kind of man is he?" Elijah's jaw tightened. The kind who thinks money and power mean he can take whatever he wants. Started with a small spread, like mine, but nothing was ever enough. He bought out neighbors, married for land, squeezed out anyone who wouldn't sell, built himself an empire on other people's broken dreams. And Margaret wouldn't be bought. Margaret wouldn't be owned. Elijah corrected. She saw through him from the start, said he had eyes like a snake, cold and calculating. When she chose me instead, he shrugged. Men like Rusk don't handle rejection well. They reached the porch, and Clara turned to face him. Do you think he'll cause trouble for us? The word us seemed to catch them both by surprise. Elijah cleared his throat. Maybe, probably, but this time I'll be ready. We'll be ready. That night, Clara lay awake thinking about boundaries and preparations, about men who took what they wanted and women who paid the price. She thought, too, about the simple pleasure of standing straight while doing laundry, of reaching exactly where things should be, of a man who quietly rebuilt his world to accommodate her presence. The next morning brought the first frost of the season, silver crystals decorating every surface. Clara built up the fire while Elijah did the morning chores, and by the time he returned, the kitchen was warm and filled with the smell of baking biscuits. Winter's coming fast, he observed, warming his hands by the stove. Then we'd better be ready. Clara replied, unconsciously echoing his philosophy of cautious preparation. They spent the day winterizing, checking chinks in the cabin walls, ensuring the root cellar was properly stocked, bringing in extra firewood. They worked in companionable rhythm, often anticipating each other's needs without words. When Clara reached for a tool, it was already being handed to her. When Elijah needed someone to hold a board, she was there before he asked. As the sun began to set, painting the frost-covered landscape in shades of rose and gold, they stood together surveying their work. Thank you, Clara said suddenly. For what? For this, she gestured at the modified clothesline, the accessible woodpile, the 1,000 small changes he'd made. For making space for me. Real space, not just allowance. Elijah was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Margaret used to say that love wasn't about finding someone who fit into your life. It was about building a life that fit around each other. The word love hung in the air between them, acknowledged but not claimed. Not yet. She was wise, Clara said softly. She was, Elijah agreed. And I think she would be glad to know her wisdom lived on, that this place is finally being what it was meant to be, a home for two people, not a monument to what was lost. Clara reached out, briefly touching his arm. It was the first time she had initiated contact between them, and Elijah felt the warmth of it through his sleeve like a brand. We should get inside, she said, temperature's dropping. As they walked toward the house, Moses dancing ahead in anticipation of supper, Elijah found himself thinking about space and accommodation, about lives that expanded rather than contracted. He thought about Clara standing tall at his modified table, reaching easily for newly placed shelves, moving through their home with growing confidence. He had rebuilt door frames for Margaret out of love. He was rebuilding them again for Clara out of something that might, given time and trust, grow into love. But for now, it was enough that she was here, that she stood straight instead of stooped, that she had stopped apologizing for the space she occupied in the world. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Rusk was still out there. Winter was coming with all its hardships, and two damaged people learning to trust again had mountains yet to climb. But tonight, with frost silvering the windows and warmth glowing from the hearth, they had a home adjusted to fit them both, a partnership growing stronger by the day, and the quiet satisfaction of belonging exactly where they were. Elijah, Clara called from the doorway. Supper's getting cold. He smiled and quickened his pace. Some invitations were worth hurrying for, and some spaces the kind carved out with saw and sandpaper. Patience and understanding were worth filling completely. The November wind carried winter's promise as Elijah and Clara drove the wagon into Bitter Creek for monthly supplies. It had been 3 months since Clara left the town on an auction platform, and this was her first return. She sat straighter than she ever had before, wearing one of her new dresses and the broad-brimmed hat that had become her constant companion. "We can go to Pine Ridge instead," Elijah offered as they neared the town limits. "Weatherby's got most everything we need." "No," Clara said firmly. "I won't hide forever. Besides, Hartley's store has the best price on flour, and we need plenty for winter." Elijah glanced at her, noting the set of her jaw and the steady way she gripped the wagon seat. "All right then, but we stick together." The main street was busy with Saturday traffic. Heads turned as they passed, whispers following in their wake like dust. Clara kept her eyes forward, but Elijah saw the slight flush creeping up her neck. They stopped first at the blacksmith's to order horseshoe nails. Tom Bradley, the smith's son, who had once compared Clara to a plow horse, gaped openly when she climbed down from the wagon unassisted. "Clara May, that you?" "Good morning, Tom," she said pleasantly. "We need 3 pounds of horseshoe nails, if you please." Tom's father emerged from the forge, wiping his hands on his leather apron. His eyes widened slightly at Clara's transformation, not just the clothes, but the way she carried herself. "Boone," he acknowledged with a nod. "Miss Clara, what can we do for you?" As they conducted their business, a small crowd began to gather. Clara recognized many faces, women she'd washed clothes beside, men whose fields she'd helped harvest. Now they stared at her like she was a stranger. This woman who stood tall instead of hunching, who spoke clearly instead of mumbling apologies for her existence. Their next stop was the general store. Silas Hartley stood behind the counter, his face cycling through several expressions when he saw them enter. His wife, Constance, emerged from the back room and stopped short. "Clara," she said, as if unable to believe her eyes. "Hey, Mrs. Hartley," Clara replied politely. "We've come for supplies." The store was fuller than usual, word having spread of their arrival. Clara moved through the aisles with Elijah, calling out their needs while he gathered items. She acted as if the staring crowd wasn't there, but Elijah noticed the tremor in her hands when she reached for a bolt of cloth. "Well, well," a new voice drawled from the doorway. "What have we here?" Elijah's shoulders tensed. The speaker was a well-dressed man with silver at his temples and cold eyes that reminded Elijah of a rattlesnake. Gideon Rusk stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 of his men. "Heard tell you'd taken in a stray. Boone." Rusk continued, his gaze sliding over Clara with calculating assessment. "Didn't realize you'd gone shopping at the livestock auction." The store went deadly quiet. Clara's face drained of color, but she didn't move, didn't shrink. Elijah stepped slightly forward, positioning himself between Rusk and Clara. "Careful, Rusk," he said quietly. "Your mouth's writing checks your hide can't cash." Rusk smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. "No offense meant, just surprised is all. Didn't think you'd be in the market for companionship after your unfortunate loss." The reference to Margaret hung in the air like a challenge. Elijah's hands clenched into fists, but Clara's voice cut through the tension. "So, Mr. Rusk, is it?" She stepped around Elijah, addressing the man directly. "I've heard about you, the man who owns half the county but can't seem to own common decency." Gasps rippled through the store. No one spoke to Gideon Rusk that way, especially not women who'd been sold off auction platforms. Rusk's eyes narrowed. "You've got a tongue on you, girl." "Woman," Clara corrected. "And yes, I do, along with a brain and backbone, despite what folks in this town might have thought." She turned to Mrs. Hartley. "That'll be 12 pounds of flour, 5 of sugar, and 2 of coffee, if you please." Constance Hartley scrambled to fill the order, clearly eager to defuse the situation. But Rusk wasn't finished. "Boone, a word of advice," he said, though his eyes never left Clara. "Be careful about taking in strays. Sometimes they bite the hand that feeds them. Sometimes they start fires they can't control." The threat was veiled but clear. Elijah moved then, crossing the space between them in 2 strides. "Get out," he said, low and dangerous. "Now." For a moment, the 2 men stood eye to eye, the air crackling with potential violence. Then Rusk smiled again, tipped his hat mockingly to Clara, and left, his men trailing behind. The store erupted in whispers. Clara's hands shook as she counted out payment for their supplies, but her voice remained steady. "Thank you, Mrs. Hartley. Good day." They loaded the wagon in silence, aware of eyes watching from every window. It wasn't until they were well out of town that Clara finally spoke. "He killed her, didn't he, Margaret? He as much as admitted it." "Yes," Elijah said simply. "And he'll try to hurt us too." "He'll try." Clara was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm not sorry for what I said." "Good. Don't be." Elijah glanced at her. "You did well back there. Stood your ground." "I was terrified," she admitted. "Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about standing tall despite the fear." He paused. "You've got more courage than anyone I've known." Clara May. They were interrupted by the sound of horses approaching fast from behind. Elijah's hand went to the rifle beside the seat, but relaxed when he saw who it was. Young Sally Morrison, the girl Clara had taught letters to, rode up on a paint pony, her mother following on a bay mare. "Miss Clara?" Sally called out. "Wait, please." They stopped the wagon. Sally's mother, Elizabeth Morrison, looked embarrassed but determined. "Clara," she said, slightly out of breath, "I wanted to, that is, I need to apologize for that day, for not speaking up when Hartley—" "It's done," Clara said quietly. "No, it's not." Elizabeth's chin lifted. "I was a coward. We all were. Letting them treat you that way, like you were less than human because you were different." She glanced at Elijah, then back to Clara. "What you said to Rusk, we've all wanted to say such things for years. You're braver than the lot of us." Sally urged her pony closer to the wagon. "I miss you, Miss Clara. You're the only one who made learning fun. The new teacher is mean and smells like mothballs." Despite everything, Clara smiled. "You keep practicing your letters. Sally, write me sometime, if your mother allows it." "You'd be welcome to visit," Elizabeth said suddenly, surprising herself. "Both of you, for Sunday dinner perhaps, when you're in town." It was an olive branch, tentatively offered. Clara looked at Elijah, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "We'd be honored." Clara said, "Thank you." As the Morrisons rode away, Elijah started the wagon again. "First crack in the wall," he observed. "What do you mean?" "Rusk's power comes from fear and folks staying divided. You standing up to him. Elizabeth Morrison finding her spine cracks in his wall. Enough cracks and walls fall down." They rode in companionable silence until the ranch came into view. Moses bounded out to meet them, barking joyfully at Clara's return. As they unloaded supplies, Clara said, "He'll retaliate, won't he, for the embarrassment?" "Probably." Elijah hefted a sack of flour. "But that's tomorrow's worry. Today, you faced down the town that tried to sell you and the man who thinks he owns the world. I'd call that a victory." That evening, as Clara prepared dinner, she found herself humming something she hadn't done in years. The confrontation with Rusk had shaken her, but it had also awakened something. For the first time in her life, she had defended herself not with silence and endurance, but with words and presence. "Thank you," she said suddenly as Elijah entered with an armload of firewood. "For what?" "For not trying to fight my battles for me, for letting me find my own voice." Elijah set down the wood and brushed off his hands. "Your battles are your own to fight. Clara, I'll stand beside you, but not in front of you. Partnership means facing things together, not one person shielding the other. Margaret was a lucky woman, Clara said softly, then flushed at her boldness. I was the lucky one, Elijah replied. And I'm lucky again. Having you here, ranch has never run better, and the house finally feels alive again. The word lucky sparked something in Clara's memory. You said red-tail hawks were good luck that first day. Did I? Elijah moved to the window. Well, would you look at that? Clara joined him. Outside, perched on a fence post, sat a red-tailed hawk, its feathers burnished gold in the setting sun. As they watched, it spread its wings and soared upward, circling once over the house before disappearing into the mountain shadows. Good omen, Elijah said quietly. Or maybe, Clara suggested, it's just a hawk, and we make our own luck. He smiled, a real smile that transformed his weathered features. Maybe you're right. Either way, I'll take it as a sign we're on the right path. As darkness fell and they settled into their evening routine, Clara reflected on the day's events. She had faced her past, stood up to a dangerous man, and begun to mend relationships she'd thought lost forever. The girl who had stood on that auction platform, silent and ashamed, seemed like a stranger now. Change, she realized, wasn't just about modified door frames and adjusted furniture. It was about finding your voice and learning to use it, about standing tall in more ways than the merely physical. And perhaps most importantly, it was about having someone beside you who believed you deserved to take up space in the world. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, Rusk's retaliation, winter's hardships, the ongoing work of building a life together. But tonight, with Moses at her feet and Elijah reading across the room, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood, the bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The first snow came early that year, blanketing the valley in pristine white 3 days after their confrontation with Rusk in town. Clara woke to an unusual brightness filtering through the bedroom window, and a silence so complete it felt like the world had stopped breathing. She dressed quickly in her warmest clothes and stepped into the main room to find Elijah already stoking the fire, Moses curled near the hearth. "Winter's here with a vengeance," he said by way of greeting. "Must be 8 inches out there already." Through the frosted windows, Clara could see the transformed landscape, the familiar landmarks, fence posts, the well. The path to the barn had become soft white sculptures. It was beautiful and somehow ominous. "The animals," she said, already reaching for her coat. "Fed and watered an hour ago," Elijah assured her. "Moved the chickens into the barn last night when I saw the clouds building. Figured this was coming." They spent the morning in necessary tasks, clearing paths, checking on livestock, ensuring their wood supply was accessible. Clara marveled at how different this was from winters at the Hartley farm, where she'd been sent out alone to tend animals no matter the weather, often returning with fingers so numb she couldn't feel them for hours. It was while carrying water from the well that she first noticed something amiss. Fresh hoofprints marked the snow near the eastern fence line, several horses, by the look of it. "Elijah," she called, and he came quickly, rifle in hand. He studied the tracks, his face grim. 3 riders, maybe 4, circled the property line but didn't cross. Recent, too snow hasn't filled them yet. Rusk's men, most likely. He straightened, scanning the tree line. Testing boundaries, seeing our routines. He's planning something. That afternoon, while Clara was in the root cellar selecting vegetables for dinner, she emerged to find Elijah in deep conversation with a stranger, a lean, weathered man with keen eyes and a sheriff's badge pinned to his coat. "Clara, this is Sheriff Matt Daniels from Pine Ridge." Elijah introduced. "He's ridden out with some news." The sheriff touched his hat brim. "Ma'am, I've been hearing things about Gideon Rusk making threats. Thought I should warn you folks to be careful." "Since when does Rusk make threats he doesn't follow through on?" Clara asked directly. Daniels looked uncomfortable. That's the thing. Ma'am, can't arrest a man for words, no matter how ugly. But I wanted you to know I'm watching. What happened to Miss Margaret? He glanced at Elijah. That won't happen again if I can help it. Appreciate you riding out, Matt. Elijah said, coffee before you head back. While the men talked, Clara prepared coffee and sliced some of the apple bread she'd baked that morning. She listened to their conversation, noting how carefully the sheriff walked the line between offering help and admitting the law's limitations when it came to wealthy men like Rusk. After Daniels left, Clara found herself staring out the window at the pristine snow, now marked with tracks theirs, the sheriff's, and those mysterious prints by the fence. He can't protect us. She said it wasn't a question. No, Elijah agreed. But it's good to know he's trying, more than the law did for Margaret. That night, Clara lay awake listening to the wind howl around the cabin. Every creak of timber, every shift of snow on the roof made her heart race. When she finally dozed, she dreamed of fire and woke gasping. She found Elijah in the main room, also unable to sleep, Moses alert at his feet. Bad dreams, he asked quietly. Clara nodded, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders as she joined him by the dying fire. About Margaret, about fire. I didn't even know her, but I dream about her. She'd have liked that, Elijah said softly. Being remembered, even by someone who never met her. She believed in the connections between people, said souls recognize kindred spirits across time and space. Tell me about her. Clara requested, not about how she died, about how she lived. So Elijah talked, his voice low and warm in the darkness. He told her about Margaret's laugh that could fill a room, her terrible cooking that he'd eaten anyway, her way of seeing beauty in broken things. He spoke of quiet evenings reading aloud to each other, of her dreams to start a school for the local children, of the garden she'd planned but never got to plant. She sounds wonderful, Clara said when he finished. But Clara, he turned to look at her in the firelight. You're not meant to be her shadow. You're your own person, with your own strengths. I need you to know that. I know, Clara said, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed it. It's just sometimes I wonder if you see her when you look at me. We're both tall. Both came to you when the world had no use for us. No. His voice was firm. I see you. Clara May, who stands up to bullies in general stores, who learns to shoot because she refuses to be helpless again, who hums when she cooks and talks to the chickens like they're people, who's teaching Moses bad habits like sleeping on beds. Despite the serious conversation, his lips quirked at that last bit. Clara felt warmth bloom in her chest. He was cold, she defended weakly. Uh-huh, and I suppose that's why he's currently on your bed instead of by the fire. Before she could respond, Moses barked sharply his warning bark. Both Clara and Elijah were on their feet instantly, Elijah grabbing his rifle. Through the window, they could see torches moving through the trees, 4 or 5 points of light approaching the ranch. Get the other rifle, Elijah commanded. Remember what I taught you. Clara ran for the weapon, her hand steady despite her racing heart. She returned to find Elijah at the front window, watching the lights draw closer. They're staying just off our property, he observed. Want us to see them but giving themselves deniability. The torches moved in a slow semicircle around the eastern boundary, the same area where they'd found tracks. Clara could make out mounted figures but not faces. What do they want? She whispered. To scare us, make us jumpy, prone to mistakes. Elijah's voice was calm, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. Rusk's way of saying he can reach us whenever he wants. They stood guard for an hour, watching the torches circle like predatory fireflies. Finally, as suddenly as they'd appeared, the lights retreated back into the forest. Will they come back? Clara asked. Not tonight. This was just a message. Elijah set down his rifle but didn't move from the window. Go back to bed. Clara, I'll keep watch. No. She settled into the rocking chair, her rifle across her lap. Partners, remember we face things together. They kept vigil through the long night, taking turns dozing while the other watched. As dawn broke gray and cold, painting the snow-covered valley in shades of pearl, Clara felt something fundamental shift inside her. She'd been frightened, yes, but she hadn't cowered. She'd stood her ground, rifle in hand, ready to defend this home that had become hers. "Clara," Elijah said suddenly, "I need you to know something. If Rusk comes for us, really comes, not just these games, I won't let happen to you what happened to Margaret. Whatever it takes." "And I won't let anything happen to you," Clara replied fiercely. "He took one person from this place. He won't take another." Elijah looked at her then, really looked, and Clara saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch not the ghost of old love, but the spark of something new. "You're a remarkable woman, Clara May," he said quietly. Before she could respond, Moses whined and pawed at the door. Normal morning needs reasserting themselves over nighttime terrors. As Clara prepared breakfast, the familiar routine soothing after the tension-filled night, she found herself thinking about fear and courage, about standing ground and standing together outside. The snow had resumed falling, covering the tracks of their nighttime visitors as if they'd never been. But they had been there, and they'd be back. Rusk had made his intentions clear. The question was no longer if he would escalate, but when and how. "We need to prepare," Elijah said over breakfast, echoing her thoughts. "Really prepare. Food, ammunition, securing the buildings. And we need allies. The Morrisons are a start, but we need more." "What about Sheriff Daniels?" "He'll help where he can, but his hands are tied without proof of wrongdoing." Elijah pushed eggs around his plate, thinking, there are others. Though, ranchers Rusk has squeezed, families Margaret taught, people who might stand with us if asked. Then we ask. Clara said simply, "Pride's a luxury we can't afford right now." Elijah smiled grimly. "Practical. I like that about you." As the day wore on and they went about strengthening their defenses, boarding windows, organizing weapons, planning escape routes they hoped never to need, Clara felt the weight of approaching storm. Not just the weather, though the snow continued to fall heavily, but the human tempest Gideon Rusk would surely bring. Yet alongside the fear ran a thread of something else: determination. She'd been sold like property, treated as worthless, made to feel ashamed of her very existence. But here, in this cabin adjusted to fit her height, beside a man who saw her worth, she'd found strength she never knew she possessed. Let Rusk come with his torches and threats. She and Elijah would meet him together, partners in truth as well as word. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The rumors started like sparks in dry grass, spreading through Bitter Creek and the surrounding settlements with vicious efficiency. Clara first heard them from Elizabeth Morrison, who rode out to the ranch on a cold December morning, her face flushed with indignation. "I thought you should know what's being said," Elizabeth began without preamble, declining Clara's offer of coffee. "That awful Rusk has people whispering the most horrible things." Clara's stomach tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "What things?" Elizabeth looked uncomfortable. That Elijah hired you for improper purposes. That you're both mad, living in sin up here. Some are even saying you're a witch who enchanted him." "A witch!" Clara almost laughed at the absurdity, but the pain in her chest was too sharp for humor. "It gets worse," Elizabeth continued grimly. "He's telling folks you're dangerous, that you threatened him in the store, that maybe what happened to Margaret wasn't an accident. And now Elijah's taken up with another unstable woman." Clara sank into a chair, the weight of Rusk's malice pressing down on her. Through the window, she could see Elijah working in the barn, unaware of this latest assault. "Why are you telling me this?" Clara asked quietly. "Because it's wrong," Elizabeth said fiercely. "And because some of us remember what Rusk did to Margaret. Even if we can't prove it, he's trying to isolate you. Turn the town against you so thoroughly that when something happens, no one will ask questions. After Elizabeth left, Clara stood at the window for a long time, watching snow fall on the peaceful valley. The paradise she'd found here suddenly felt fragile, threatened not by torches in the night but by whispers in the day. When she told Elijah that evening, his face went dark with rage. "That snake," he growled, pacing the cabin like a caged cougar. "Using Margaret's memory to hurt you, there's no depth he won't sink to." "Maybe I should leave," Clara said quietly. "If I go, he'll have no reason to—" "Don't!" Elijah stopped pacing, turning to face her. "Don't you dare let him drive you away. This is your home now. We stand and fight, together." But fighting whispers proved harder than facing midnight riders. Over the following weeks, Clara noticed the changes when they went to town. People who had begun warming to her after the Morrison family's acceptance now crossed streets to avoid her. Conversations ceased when she entered stores. Children were pulled close by mothers who eyed her with suspicion. The breaking point came 2 days before Christmas. They'd gone to Pine Ridge for supplies, hoping the larger town would be less poisoned by rumors. But even there, Rusk's influence had spread. Clara was examining fabric for new curtains when she heard the whispers. "That's her, the crazy woman from the mountains. Heard she communes with spirits up there. Poor Mr. Boone lost one woman to fire and now saddled with a mad woman." Clara's hands trembled as she set down the fabric. She left the store without purchasing anything, finding Elijah loading grain into the wagon. "We need to go," she said tightly. He took one look at her face and helped her into the wagon without questions. They rode in silence until well out of town. Then Elijah pulled the horses to a stop. "Talk to me," he said gently. The words poured out the whispers, the stares, the weight of being seen as something monstrous. "They think I'm mad," she finished. "Dangerous. Maybe they're right. Maybe taking me in was the best decision I've made since coming here." Elijah interrupted firmly. "Clara, look at me." She met his eyes reluctantly. "You're the sanest, strongest person I know. What's mad is how this world treats women who don't fit its narrow molds. What's dangerous is men like Rusk who destroy what they can't control." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She found herself in the barn, brushing the horses by lamplight, finding comfort in the simple task. That's where young Sally Morrison found her, having snuck out despite the late hour. "Miss Clara," the girl whispered urgently. "I had to warn you. I heard Pa talking Mr. Rusk is planning something for Christmas Eve. He's got folks worked up, saying you've bewitched Mr. Boone, that you need to be saved from each other." Clara's blood ran cold. "Sally, you need to get home before you're missed." "I don't care," the girl said fiercely. "You taught me to read, to think for myself. You're the best person in this valley, and I won't let them hurt you." Touched despite her fear, Clara hugged the brave child. "Thank you for warning us. Now go, quickly." After Sally left, Clara woke Elijah and shared the warning. His face was grim in the lamplight. "Christmas Eve. Of course, when decent folk are with their families, less likely to interfere." He thought for a moment. "We need help. Clara can't face a mob alone." The next day, they rode to neighboring ranches, swallowing pride to ask for aid. Some turned them away, fear of Rusk overcoming any sympathy, but others Tom Garrett, who Rusk had cheated in a land deal, the widow Patterson, whose husband had died mysteriously after opposing Rusk. A handful of others agreed to stand with them. "It's not about you," Garrett said bluntly. "It's about stopping Rusk before he destroys anyone else." On Christmas Eve, as snow began falling again, Clara and Elijah prepared for siege. Their allies were positioned around the property, some in the barn, others hidden along the approach roads. Sheriff Daniels had promised to patrol, though they all knew he couldn't act without cause. Clara wore her father's old pistol, retrieved from her wooden box of memories. Elijah had his rifle close at hand. They tried to maintain normal evening routines, but tension thrummed through the cabin. Near midnight, Moses began growling. Through the windows, they could see torches approaching not the few riders of before, but dozens of lights moving through the darkness. "They're coming," Clara breathed. Elijah squeezed her shoulder. "Remember, we're not alone." The mob stopped at the property line. Clara could see Rusk at the front, righteous fury painted on his face. Beside him stood several town leaders. Including Clara's heart sank Silas Hartley. "Silas." "Boone," Rusk called out. "We've come to free you from this woman's unholy influence. Send her out, and there need be no trouble." Elijah stepped onto the porch, rifle visible, but not raised. "The only unholy influence here is yours. Rusk, get off my land." "You're not thinking clearly." Rusk insisted, playing to his audience. "She's bewitched you, just like that other woman tried to, but this time, we're here to save you from yourself." "Liar." The voice came from the darkness, Tom Garrett emerging from cover. "Everyone knows you killed Margaret Wright because she rejected you. Now you're trying the same with Miss Clara." Other allies appeared: the widow Patterson, Elizabeth Morrison and her husband, even young Deputy Carson from Pine Ridge. The mob, expecting to find two isolated victims, shifted uneasily at the show of support. But it was Clara who truly changed the moment. She stepped out beside Elijah, tall and straight, no longer hiding. "You want to know what's bewitched him?" she called out, her voice carrying clear through the cold night. "Kindness, decency, the radical idea that a woman's worth isn't measured by her size or her willingness to shrink herself." She looked directly at Silas Hartley. "You sold me like property because I was too big to be a proper woman. But Elijah saw what you couldn't, that there's nothing wrong with taking up space in this world." "She admits it," someone in the mob cried. "She's corrupted him." "The only corruption here," Sheriff Daniels said, riding up with several deputies, "is a mob threatening law-abiding citizens on Christmas Eve. Disperse now, or I'll arrest the lot of you for disturbing the peace." The crowd wavered. Some, shamed by the sheriff's presence, began melting away. But Rusk stood firm. "You can't protect them forever, Sheriff," he said coldly. "Evil has a way of destroying itself." "Is that a threat, Mr. Rusk?" Daniels asked mildly. "Because that would be something I could arrest you for." Rusk's face twisted, but he was trapped by his own pretense of righteousness. With a sharp gesture, he turned his horse. "This isn't over," he promised, locking eyes with Clara. "No," she agreed quietly. "It's not." The mob dispersed, leaving Clara and Elijah's supporters in the snowy yard. There were handshakes, embraces, promises of continued vigilance. The Morrisons insisted on staying the night in the barn, just in case. When everyone was settled, Clara and Elijah found themselves alone by the fire. The Christmas they'd planned quiet. Simple had been shattered, but something else had been born from the confrontation. "You were magnificent," Elijah said softly, standing up to them all like that. "I was terrified," Clara admitted, "but you stood anyway." He paused, then reached out to take her hand. "Clara, I need you to know what I feel for you has nothing to do with spells or confusion. You've brought life back to this place, to me. That's not witchcraft, that's just you." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Even with all this trouble I've brought—" "You didn't bring any trouble. Rusk did, and we'll face him together, whatever comes." He squeezed her hand gently. "Merry Christmas, Clara." "Merry Christmas, Elijah." Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the tracks of the mob as if trying to erase the ugliness of the night. But Clara knew the real storm was still building. Rusk wouldn't forget this humiliation, this public defiance. Still, surrounded by proof that they weren't alone, that good people would stand against evil when called upon, Clara felt something she hadn't expected on this fraught night. Hope. The battle wasn't won, but for the first time, it felt winnable. The meeting was called for the second Sunday in January, held in the small chapel at the crossroads between Bitter Creek and Pine Ridge. Word had spread through the valley that Clara would speak, and curiosity drew folks who might otherwise have stayed away. Some came to gawk at the witch woman, others out of genuine interest, and a few Clara suspected as Rusk's eyes and ears. Elijah had argued against it. "You don't need to justify yourself to anyone," he'd said that morning as Clara dressed in her best outfit, the town occasion dress he'd bought her months ago. "This isn't about justification," Clara replied, pinning her hair up with steady hands. "It's about truth. Rusk has controlled the narrative long enough." The chapel was fuller than expected when they arrived. Clara recognized many faces, some friendly, others hostile, most simply curious. Elizabeth Morrison and her family sat near the front, a gesture of support that didn't go unnoticed. Sheriff Daniels stood at the back, ostensibly there to keep peace, but clearly interested in what would unfold. Reverend Samuel Hayes, the elderly preacher who'd spoken against the auction months ago, had agreed to moderate. He stood now, raising his hands for silence. "We're here because rumors and discord have poisoned our community," he began. "Miss Clara May has asked to address these matters directly. I expect Christian courtesy from all present." Clara rose from her seat beside Elijah, aware of every eye following her movement. She'd brought something with her, a small hand axe, which she placed deliberately on the podium. The gesture caused murmurs throughout the congregation. "This," she said, her voice clear and steady, "is a tool in the right hands. It builds homes, provides warmth, creates. In the wrong hands, it destroys, like strength itself." She paused, scanning the crowd. "I've been called too big, too strong, unnatural for a woman. Some of you," her eyes found Silas Hartley, skulking near the door, "thought me worthless because of it. Others now call me dangerous for the same reason." "You threatened Mr. Rusk," someone called out. "I spoke truth to Mr. Rusk," Clara corrected calmly. "If that's threatening, perhaps he should examine why truth frightens him so." She lifted the axe, hefting it easily in one hand, a gesture that would have been impossible for most women present. "Yes, I'm strong enough to lift grain sacks, mend fences, defend a home. Why should that be shameful? Why should I pretend weakness when God gave me capability?" "It ain't natural," muttered someone. "Neither is binding women's ribs with corsets until they can't breathe." Clara shot back. "Neither is telling girls they must be helpless to be worthy of love. What's natural is using the gifts we're given." Reverend Hayes intervened gently. "Perhaps you could tell us, in your own words, about your life since leaving the Hartley farm." Clara nodded, setting down the axe. "Elijah Boone offered me work and shelter, honest work for honest wages. He's treated me with more respect than I've known since my parents died. He modified his home to accommodate my height, not because I bewitched him, but because that's what decent people do, make space for others." "And Margaret Wright?" The question came from Gideon Rusk himself, who'd entered quietly during her speech. "Do you deny taking her place?" The chapel fell silent. Clara met his cold gaze steadily. "I deny nothing about Margaret Wright except your implications," she said. "She was murdered, yes. I'll say the word by someone who couldn't accept rejection. I sleep in a room prepared for her, walk through doorways widened for her comfort, tend a ranch she helped plan. If that's taking her place, then I do so with humility and hope that I can honor her memory." "You have no proof of murder," Rusk said smoothly. "And you have no proof of witchcraft," Clara countered. "Yet here we are." Sheriff Daniels stepped forward slightly, his presence a subtle warning. Rusk noticed and subsided, but his eyes promised retribution. Young Sally Morrison suddenly stood up. "May I speak, Reverend?" Surprised, Hayes nodded. The girl walked to the front, barely reaching Clara's elbow but radiating determination. "Miss Clara taught me to read when no one else would bother with a girl," Sally announced. "She worked harder than any man at the Hartley farm, but ate last and least. She's never hurt anybody, never spoke ill even when folks were cruel. If that's witchcraft, then we need more witches." "The child's been influenced," someone began. "The child has eyes and a mind." Elizabeth Morrison interrupted, standing beside her daughter, which is more than some supposed adults here can claim. Tom Garrett rose next. "I'll speak plain. Rusk's had his boot on this valley's neck for years. Miss Clara and Boone are just his latest targets. This meeting isn't about her character, it's about his power." The chapel erupted in arguments. Reverend Hayes called for order, but voices rose higher, neighbors turning on neighbors. Through it all, Clara stood calmly at the podium, waiting. Finally, she picked up the axe and brought it down hard on the podium. The sharp crack silenced the room. "This is what he wants," she said into the quiet. "Us divided, fighting each other while he pulls the strings. I came here to speak my truth, not to cause discord." She looked around the room, meeting as many eyes as would hold hers. "I am Clara May. I'm tall, I'm strong, and I'm staying. I'll work the Boone Ranch, help my neighbors when needed, and live my life without apology. Those who wish me ill will have to live with their own bitterness. Those who offer friendship will find it returned tenfold." She picked up the axe and walked back to her seat. Elijah took her hand as she sat, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed but which neither of them tried to hide. Reverend Hayes cleared his throat. "I believe we've heard enough. This congregation was built on principles of love and acceptance. I suggest we all examine our hearts to see if we're living up to those ideals." People began filing out, some stopping to shake Clara's hand, others departing quickly. Rusk paused at the door, speaking just loud enough for Clara and Elijah to hear. "You've made your choice, Miss May. Remember that when the consequences come." After he left, Sheriff Daniels approached. "That was either very brave or very foolish, miss." "Can't it be both?" Clara asked with a slight smile. The sheriff chuckled despite himself. "Stay vigilant. Rusk doesn't make idle threats." As the chapel emptied, leaving only their core group of supporters, Clara felt the energy drain from her. She'd stood before the community, declared herself, refused to shrink or apologize. But she knew the real battle was far from over. "You were magnificent," said Widow Patterson, clasping Clara's hands. "About time someone stood up in this valley besides poor Margaret." The mention of Margaret made Clara glance at Elijah, but his face showed only pride and concern for her. Whatever ghosts haunted him, they didn't shadow his support for the living woman beside him. On the ride home, Clara leaned against Elijah's shoulder, exhausted by the emotional toll of public confrontation. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for letting me do that my way." "Your battles, your way," he reminded her, though I nearly intervened when Rusk showed up. "I'm glad you didn't. This needed to come from me." She straightened, watching the familiar landmarks of home appear. "Do you think it helped?" "You changed some minds today," Elijah said thoughtfully. "Reminded people that there's more than one way to be strong. That's worth doing, regardless of Rusk." That evening, as they went about normal chores with Moses dancing between them, Clara reflected on the day. She'd claimed her space publicly, refused to be diminished, stood tall in every sense, whatever came next. She'd face it as herself, not the broken girl on the auction platform, not Margaret's shadow, but Clara May, strong and unashamed. The stars emerged in the clear winter sky, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled wild and free and unafraid to announce its presence to the world. Clara understood the feeling completely. As they prepared for bed, Elijah stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. "Clara, what you said today about honoring Margaret's memory, you do, but more than that, you honor your own strength. Never doubt that you belong here because of who you are, not who came before. The words warmed her more than any fire could. Elijah, A crash from the barn interrupted whatever she might have said. They grabbed weapons and rushed out to find a window broken, a rock with a note attached lying among the scattered hay. By lamplight, Elijah read aloud, "Final warning, leave or burn." Clara's jaw tightened. "He's escalating." "Yes," Elijah agreed grimly. "The question is, what do we do about it?" Clara looked at the broken glass, then at the man beside her, then up at the stars still shining despite the darkness. "We stand," she said firmly. "Together, whatever comes." Moses growled agreement, pressing against Clara's skirts. Even the animals, it seemed, knew which side they were on. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats. But tonight, Clara May had spoken her truth to the world and found her voice stronger than fear. It was enough. For now, it was enough. The fire started just after midnight on the last day of January. Clara woke to Moses barking frantically and the acrid smell of smoke. Through her window, she could see orange flames licking at the barn's east wall. "Fire!" she shouted, already pulling on boots and grabbing the water bucket by the door. "Elijah, the barn's on fire!" They rushed out together into the bitter cold night. The flames had caught the dry timber and were spreading fast, encouraged by winter wind. Inside, the horses were screaming in terror, their kicks thundering against stall walls. The animals! Clara didn't hesitate, while Elijah ran for more buckets. She plunged into the smoke-filled barn. The heat hit her like a physical wall, but she pushed forward, guided by the horses' panicked cries. She reached the first stall where Buttercup, Elijah's mare, was rearing in terror. Clara grabbed a feed sack, threw it over the horse's head to cover her eyes, and let her out. No time for saddles or proper halters, just get them out. Back into the inferno. The smoke was thicker now, stinging her eyes, choking her lungs. She found the other horses, Elijah's gelding Storm and her own mount, a steady mare called Sage. One by one, she led them out, her height and strength allowing her to control the panicked animals where a smaller person might have been trampled. Outside, Elijah had organized a bucket brigade with Tom Garrett and the Morrison family, who'd seen the flames from their homestead, but it was clear they were fighting a losing battle. The fire had taken hold too firmly. "Let it go," Garrett shouted. "Save what you can." Clara ignored him. The chickens were still in there, roosting in the barn's loft. She'd raised some of those birds from chicks, talked to them every morning. She couldn't let them burn. "Clara, no!" Elijah tried to grab her, but she was already gone, ducking back into the barn with a wet cloth over her face. The loft ladder was already smoking. Clara climbed it anyway, feeling the wood crack ominously under her weight. The chickens were huddled in the corner, too terrified to move. She grabbed as many as she could carry, stuffing them into a feed sack, their wings beating against her face. The ladder gave way as she descended, and she fell the last 6 feet, landing hard but keeping hold of the sack. Her ankles screamed in protest, but she limped toward the door as burning timber began falling from above. She burst from the barn just as a section of roof collapsed behind her. Elijah caught her as she stumbled, both of them falling to the snow-covered ground. The chickens escaped the sack and scattered, alive and indignant. "You fool woman," Elijah shouted, but his arms were tight around her, and she could feel him shaking. "You beautiful, brave fool." They watched helplessly as the barn became a pillar of fire against the night sky. All they could do now was prevent it from spreading to the house and other outbuildings. Neighbors had arrived, word traveling fast even in the depths of night, and formed a protective line, dousing the ground between structures. It was Elizabeth Morrison who first noticed the pattern. "Look," she said, pointing to the snow. "Hoof prints, leading right up to where the fire started." Sheriff Daniels, who'd arrived with the dawn, studied the tracks grimly. They led east, toward Rusk's property, though they'd be impossible to follow once they hit the commonly used roads. Could have been anyone, he said reluctantly. No proof it was Rusk or his men. No proof, Clara repeated bitterly, looking at the smoldering ruins of the barn. Months of hay. Gone. Feed stores. Destroyed. Tools. Harnesses. Everything needed to run a ranch ashes. But as the sun rose higher, revealing the full extent of the damage, something remarkable happened. Tom Garrett was the first, arriving with a wagon load of lumber. Figured you'd be needing this, he said gruffly. Then came the widow Patterson with feed for the animals. The Morrisons brought tools. Even families who'd been cold to Clara at the chapel meeting arrived with supplies. Labor, or both. We don't hold with burning folks out, one grizzled rancher explained. Whatever our differences, that ain't the way. By midday, the ruins were still smoking, but the framework for a new barn was already being sketched in the snow. Clara, her ankle wrapped but functional, worked alongside the men, her strength welcomed now rather than scorned. You saved every living thing in that barn, Elizabeth Morrison said. Bringing Clara water. Risked your life for horses and chickens. People notice such things. They're my responsibility, Clara said simply. You don't abandon what's in your care. Elijah overheard and paused in his work, looking at her with an expression that made her heart skip. But this wasn't the time for whatever words might be brewing between them. As the sun reached its zenith, more riders appeared on the horizon. Clara tensed, expecting Rusk's men, but relaxed when she recognized the lead rider, Judge Thomas Crawford from the county seat, accompanied by several official-looking men. Heard there was some trouble out here, the judge said, surveying the damage. Also heard some interesting things about patterns of harassment, threats, and possible arson. Sheriff Daniels stepped forward. Now, Judge, we can't prove all. Maybe not for court, Crawford interrupted. But I've got eyes and a memory. Margaret Wright's death. Now this, man would have to be blind not to see a pattern. He looked directly at Clara. Miss May, I understand you've been subjected to considerable harassment. Clara straightened, aware that this might be their chance. Yes, sir, threats. Rumors meant to turn the community against me. Men circling the property at night. And now this. The judge nodded thoughtfully. Reverend Hayes sent me a letter after your chapel meeting. Several others did too. Seems Mr. Rusk has overplayed his hand. You can't arrest a man on suspicion. Daniels protested weakly. No, but I can make it clear that this county won't tolerate reign by terror. Crawford said firmly. And I can ensure any future accidents are investigated with extreme thoroughness. He turned his horse to address the gathered crowd. Let it be known that anyone who threatens or harms the residents of this ranch will answer to me personally. The law may be slow sometimes, but it's not blind. The message was clear. Rusk's immunity, built on wealth and fear, had cracked. He wasn't untouchable anymore. As the judge departed, Elijah approached Clara where she was helping to sort salvageable items from the ruins. Your courage did this, he said quietly. Standing up at that meeting, refusing to be cowed, you showed people that Rusk could be defied. We defied him together, Clara corrected, and we'll rebuild together. Clara, Elijah began, then stopped, glancing around at the crowd of helpers. Later, when we're not surrounded by half the valley, she nodded, understanding. Some conversations needed privacy. The afternoon was spent in communal labor. A barn raising was planned for the following week, but temporary shelter for the animals was the immediate need. Clara worked tirelessly despite her injured ankle, earning approving nods from men who'd once dismissed her as an oddity. As darkness began to fall, the helpers departed with promises to return. The Morrison family was the last to leave. Sally hugging Clara fiercely. You're the bravest person I know, the girl whispered. When I grow up, I want to be just like you. Be better, Clara whispered back. Be yourself, but better. when they were finally alone. Clara and Elijah stood looking at the temporary lean-to that housed their horses, the chickens roosting in the equipment shed, the blackened earth where the barn had stood. "We survived," Clara said. "You could have died," Elijah said roughly, "running back in for chickens." "You would have done the same," she interrupted. "Don't deny it. I know you. Elijah Boone. You don't abandon what's yours to care for." He turned to her then, his face intense in the fading light. "No," he agreed. "I don't. And Clara, you need to know you're not just someone in my care. You're—" A shout interrupted him. Tom Garrett was riding back hard, his face grim. "Rusk's barn is on fire," he announced breathlessly. "Started about an hour ago. He's claiming you two did it in retaliation." Clara and Elijah exchanged shocked looks. They'd been surrounded by witnesses all day. "That's impossible," Clara said. "We've been here with half the valley watching." "I know that. Judge Crawford knows that. But Rusk's demanding arrests, saying you must have sent someone." Garrett paused. "Thing is, nobody believes him. Word is one of his own men got careless with a lantern, trying to hide evidence from last night. The irony was sharp enough to cut Rusk hoist by his own petard." "Is anyone hurt?" Elijah asked, because he was that kind of man. "No deaths. Few burns among those fighting it. But Rusk lost more than a barn, he lost face. Man who lives by fire." Garrett shrugged eloquently. After he left, Clara and Elijah stood in the gathering darkness, processing this turn of events. "It's not over," Clara said. "He'll blame us more now." "Maybe. Or maybe he'll realize the town won't stand for any more accidents." Elijah took her hand. "Either way, we'll face it." "Together," Clara agreed, then added with a slight smile, "You were about to say something before Tom arrived." Elijah squeezed her hand. "It'll keep. Right now. You need rest. Hero's work is exhausting. I hear—" "I'm no hero, just a woman who refuses to lose any more than she already has." "Same thing, in my book," Elijah said softly. As they walked toward the house, Moses dancing around their feet, Clara felt the shift in the air. The fire that had been meant to destroy them had instead revealed the community's true character. They'd chosen to stand with right over might, courage over fear. The war with Rusk wasn't over, but for the first time, Clara believed they could win it. And whatever Elijah had been about to say, whatever was growing between them in the ashes of old pain and new hope, that could grow too. Tomorrow they would begin rebuilding, but tonight they were together, alive and unbroken. The rest was just details. The Harvest Festival came to Bitter Creek every October, marking the end of another growing season and the community's preparation for winter. This year, as Clara stood before the mirror in her bedroom, adjusting the silver bracelet on her wrist, she could hardly recognize the woman looking back at her. 8 months had passed since the fires, both theirs and Rusk's. The new barn stood proud and strong, built by community hands and reinforced by community spirit. Rusk had retreated. His influence diminished, though not entirely broken. And between Clara and Elijah, something had grown as steadily as the crops in their fields. "Clara," Elijah called from the main room. "We should head out soon if we want to get a good spot for the wagon." She emerged, wearing her best dress, a deep blue that brought out the auburn highlights in her hair. Elijah stopped mid-sentence, his eyes warming with appreciation. "You look—" He cleared his throat. "That is, you're beautiful. Clara." After months of careful courtship, of hands that lingered when passing tools, of evenings reading together by the fire, they had finally acknowledged what everyone else could see. They weren't just partners in work anymore. The ride to town was filled with comfortable conversation about the ranch, the upcoming winter preparations, the new foal born just last week, but underneath ran a current of anticipation. Today would be different. Today, they would appear publicly as a courting couple for the first time. The town square was already bustling when they arrived. Booths selling preserves, quilts, and handicrafts lined the streets. Children ran between the adults' legs, playing tag and begging for penny candy. The smell of roasting meat and apple cider filled the air. Clara Mister. Boone. Sally Morrison came running, now a full inch taller than when Clara had first taught her letters. Ma's got a booth selling her preserves. She said to tell you to come by. As they walked through the festival, Clara noticed the change in how people greeted them. Where once there had been whispers and stares, now there were nods of respect, genuine smiles, even warmth. She had earned her place in this community through courage and hard work. Well, if it isn't our local hero. Tom Garrett called out from where he was judging a pie contest. Clara, you've got to try Mrs. Patterson's apple pie. Woman's outdone herself this year. They sampled pies, admired quilts, and watched the children's sack races. Clara found herself laughing more freely than she had in years, especially when Elijah got roped into the arm wrestling competition and had to face off against the blacksmith. As the sun began to set, lanterns were lit throughout the square, and the dancing platform was cleared. The fiddler took his place, and couples began forming for the first dance. May I? Elijah offered his hand to Clara, a formal gesture that made her heart flutter despite months of partnership. I should warn you, Clara said as she took his hand. I haven't danced since I was very young, and never with someone who could actually lead properly. Then we'll learn together, he said, guiding her onto the platform. They must have made quite a sight, both tall, both strong, moving together with careful grace. Clara was aware of eyes on them, but for once, the attention didn't sting. These people had seen her fight fires, stand up to bullies, work alongside them to rebuild. They knew her worth now. As they danced, Elijah spoke quietly, for her ears alone. Margaret's mother sent me a letter last week. She'd heard about everything that happened, about you. She said she was glad the house was finally being lived in as intended with love and laughter. Clara missed a step, but Elijah steadied her. That must have been difficult to read. No, he said simply. It was freeing, like a blessing. In a way, the past is past. Clara, it's the future I'm interested in now. Before the Clara could respond, a commotion erupted near the platform. Mayor Harrison was calling for attention, flanked by Judge Crawford and Reverend Hayes. Folks, if I could have your attention, the mayor called out. We have some special recognition to make tonight. The music stopped, and the crowd gathered around. Clara tried to step back, but Elijah kept her hand firmly in his. This has been a year of trials for our community, the mayor continued. But it's also been a year of revelation. We've learned the difference between true strength and bullying, between real courage and false bravado. He looked directly at Clara. Miss Clara May, would you please come forward? Clara felt her face flame, but Elijah gently pushed her toward the officials. The crowd parted to let her through. 8 months ago, Mayor Harrison said, this woman risked her life to save every living creature in a burning barn. But more than that, she stood up to forces that had kept our community in fear for too long. She showed us that courage comes in many forms, and that a person's worth isn't measured by conformity to narrow expectations. Judge Crawford stepped forward. The town council has voted unanimously to present you with this certificate of commendation for exceptional bravery and service to the community of Bitter Creek. Clara accepted the certificate with shaking hands, overwhelmed by the public acknowledgement, but the mayor wasn't finished. Furthermore, he announced, we'd like to offer you a position on the town's new school board. We need someone who understands that education is for everyone, regardless of circumstances. I don't know what to say, Clara managed. Say yes, called out Elizabeth Morrison, and the crowd laughed. Yes, Clara said, stronger now. I accept. Thank you. As applause erupted, Clara's eyes found Elijah in the crowd. He was beaming with pride, and something else, something that made her hurry back to his side as soon as the formal presentation ended. "A school board member," he said, taking her arm. "Should I start calling you Madam Board Member?" "Don't you dare," she warned, but she was smiling. As the dancing resumed, they were approached by an unexpected figure, Silas Hartley, looking older and somehow smaller than Clara remembered. "Clara," he said awkwardly, "I wanted to. That is, what I did was wrong, selling you off like that. My wife, she's been at me about it ever since, says I need to make amends." Clara studied her former guardian, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time, a small, frightened man who'd never known what to do with a girl who didn't fit his narrow world. "What's done is done, Mr. Hartley," she said evenly. "But I appreciate the apology." He nodded, relief evident on his face, and scurried away. Elijah watched him go with narrowed eyes. "That took courage," Clara said softly. "That took his wife's nagging, more like," Elijah replied, making her laugh. As the evening progressed, Clara found herself at the center of a warm circle of acceptance. Women who had once whispered about her now sought her opinions. Men who had mocked her strength now respected it. Children looked up at her quite literally with admiration rather than fear. "Shall we take a walk?" Elijah suggested as the festivities began to wind down. They strolled to the edge of the square, where a bench sat beneath an old oak tree. The sounds of the festival continued behind them, but here it was quieter, more private. "Clara," Elijah began, then stopped, running his hand through his hair in a gesture she'd come to recognize as nervousness. "I had a whole speech planned, but standing here with you, I can't remember a word of it." "Then don't make a speech," Clara suggested, her heart beginning to race. He took both her hands in his. "You're right. Simple is better." He looked into her eyes, his own full of emotion. "Clara May, you came into my life when I thought it was over. You brought light back to a house full of shadows, strength when I felt weak, and hope when I had none. I love you not as an echo of the past, but as the promise of the future. Will you marry me?" Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Elijah Boone, you gave me a home when the world cast me out. You saw me as worthy when everyone else saw only something to be discarded. You helped me find my voice and my courage. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, with all my heart." He pulled her to her feet and into his arms, kissing her there beneath the oak tree while the harvest moon rose full and bright above them. When they finally parted, both were smiling through tears. "I have something for you," Elijah said, pulling out a small box. Inside was a ring not new, but beautiful in its aged simplicity. "This was my grandmother's. She was tall, too, strong-willed, didn't fit the mold. Grandmother used to say it was made for a woman who could stand tall and never apologize for it." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here from the auction platform to this moment of joy, from silence to voice, from shame to pride. "When?" she asked, admiring how the ring caught the lamplight. "Winter wedding," Elijah suggested. "Give the town something to celebrate during the cold months." "Perfect," Clara agreed. They walked back to the festival hand in hand, and their news spread quickly through the crowd. By the time they reached their wagon to head home, they'd been congratulated by half the town. As they drove home under the stars, Moses running alongside the wagon, Clara reflected on how much had changed. The woman who'd stood on that platform, believing herself worthless, seemed like a stranger now. In her place was someone who had found her strength, her voice, and her place in the world. "Penny for your thoughts?" Elijah asked. "Just thinking about beginnings and endings," Clara said, "and how sometimes what seems like an ending is really just the start of something better." "To new beginnings, then," Elijah said, raising an imaginary glass. "To being just right," Clara countered, remembering his first words to her. "Just right for these arms, this life, this love." The ranch came into view, lamplight glowing warmly in the windows. Home, truly home now, in every sense of the word. As they pulled into the yard, Clara stood tall on the wagon seat, stretching her arms wide to embrace the night sky. No more hunching, no more making herself small. She was Clara May, soon to be Clara Boone, and she was exactly the right size for the life she'd built. The stars seemed to shine brighter in agreement, and somewhere in the distance, a red-tailed hawk called a wild, free sound that spoke of strength and soaring and never looking back. It was, Clara thought as Elijah helped her down from the wagon, a perfect ending to their story's beginning. And tomorrow, their real adventure would continue. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what you thought about Clara and Elijah's journey. If you enjoyed this tale of courage, love, and standing tall against adversity, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit the like button. And don't forget to press the hype button to help this story reach more listeners who appreciate authentic frontier romance. Until our next adventure in the Old West, partners.